Well, hey everyone, it's Nate here. Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Vinyl Guide. We are featuring one of my absolute favorite musicians and songwriters, Mr. Andy Partridge, best known for his time with XTC. Now today, Andy takes us through the XTC journey, discusses the early days, his songwriting techniques leveraging synesthesia. He talks about forming the band that became XTC, the early recordings, the rare records, the current remasters, the recent reissues, the vinyl, the cover art, the master tapes, and heaps more. And in his very unique way of storytelling, Andy makes it all extremely entertaining and wonderfully illustrated. Now, as many of you know, much of the XTC catalog is being remastered and reissued on vinyl, and to hear more and to even grab copies of these reissues while they last, head over to ape.uk.net. That's ape.uk.net. Nonsuch is there, perhaps my favorite XTC record, as well as Apple Venus, Oranges and Lemons, Drums and Wires, and more. XTC is such a wonderful band, and the evolution of their music is so significant. No two albums really even sound the same. Throughout their career, Andy and the band continued to take leaps and bounds in both songwriting and recording in ways that enable us to listen to just about any of their albums and appreciate them individually and in a uniquely refreshing way. So head over to ape.uk.net and grab some of these wonderful XTC vinyl reissues while you can. And today we are brought to you in part by the Groove Washer record cleaner. The Groove Washer is the best record cleaner that I've ever used and perhaps the best one on the market today. And don't take my word for it. Ask any of the thousands of people who regularly trust their precious vinyl records to the Groove Washer record cleaner. Don't get that no-name cleaner at your local record shop. Ask for the Groove Washer by name or go to groovewasher.com and get the very best record cleaner in the world shipped directly to your front door. Use discount code VinylGuide10 and get an extra discount at groovewasher.com. That's the Groove Washer, discount code VinylGuide10. And we're also sponsored by AudiofileUSA.com, the online record shop that only sells excellent and near-mint vinyl records. No guessing, no eBay or Discogs Russian roulette. You'll never be disappointed when you open a package of records from AudiofileUSA.com. Nearly 50,000 titles in stock. Head over to their website, search and dig and find those amazing deals. I literally have the punk and jazz genres bookmark at AudiofileUSA.com, and I check them out every week or two, and I've found some amazing deals there. So go to AudiofileUSA.com. Excellent and near-mint records shipped around the world. That's AudiofileUSA.com. Go there now and find your holy grail. And finally, if you enjoy this show, please enjoy some of our other episodes and interviews on the Vinyl Guide podcast, including longtime Patti Smith collaborator and record collector Lenny Kaye, episode 254 of the Vinyl Guide, Pink Floyd bass player and all-around nice guy, the always entertaining Guy Pratt, episode 237 of the Vinyl Guide, Colin Newman of Wire, episode 232, Jellyfish co-founder Roger Joseph Manning Jr., episode 182, Beatles collaborator Klaus Vormann, episode 141 of the Vinyl Guide, and heaps more. All these episodes and about 250 others are available at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Sonnet, or wherever you get your podcasts. Just subscribe to the Vinyl Guide and enjoy. And now, with the upfronts done, let's all turn our collective attention towards the United Kingdom and into a music garden shed in the backyard of a home on the outskirts of the city of Swindon and have a musical chat with one of the most wonderfully talented and entertaining songwriters of our time, Mr. Andy Partridge.
Hey, Nate.
Good morning, Andy. How are you?
Pretty good. I'm still alive, which is a kind of weird bonus in this day and age.
Yeah, it's not always guaranteed now, is it?
Yeah. So hang on, you sound zero, like an Aussie.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Well, to my American compatriots, I have picked up a bit of a soft R here and there, but no, I've been in Australia now about 20 years.
Oh, right. So you're not saying Struth, mate.
No, I'll need a few beers to do that, but I do spell color with a U now. So,
well, the classics. You can't beat the classics.
no.
The classic garbled British spellings. It was all new to us. The English language is really the biggest mongrel on earth. So,
as an American, it's like, why do I need a U in favor? Let's go straight to the R.
Yeah, yeah. Why bother with O's at all? So look, you can record all this, and you're okay about making an edit.
Absolutely.
Can I be relaxed and use profanity here and there?
I insist.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Fucking brilliant.
go for your life, and and if you make a mistake or you slander someone and you want to walk back on it, just let me know and I'll make sure it comes out.
Oh, I'll say the magic word edit.
No worries.
So when do you want to start?
Well, I think we're kind of already starting, if that's all right.
Oh, okay. All righty. Well, okay, there. Edit. We can start.
Okay, and scene. So you're doing all right up there in England. I know it's a very strange environment, but are you keeping yourself busy? You still making music?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm down to the shed at the bottom of the garden, which is like my little magical mini palace. I tell people it's the TARDIS in reverse. It's reasonably sized, and you get in and it's microscopic.
Well, all the soundproofing kind of pads you in there. Is that what?
Well, it's not so much soundproofing. It's kind of acoustically treated, but to be honest, if it's a warm day and the neighbors are in the garden, I feel really trepidatious about attempting to sing, because I know they can hear me, straining for that note.
And what's interesting is I've been listening to to the catalog quite intently over the past few weeks, and your singing style evolved so much over the course of the XTC recordings. I think at one point you said it was kind of like almost a bark, and then in the very towards the later albums, it was just very. It seemed like it became trained. Did you take lessons in that time?
No, I've not had lessons in anything. I have zero musical theory. I've had zero lessons in playing any instrument or singing or anything. No, what happened is when we started out, I thought to myself, okay, it's our first album coming up or first recordings coming up, and I've got to be memorable. Because, we got to be remembered. So I kind of put together a style that I thought was all the most kind of distinctive sounds from records I liked. There was like a Buddy Holly's kind of Hiccup, or there was Steve Harley, Cockney Rebels' Howl. And, you put that in with the necessity of you have to make sounds that are going to cut through cheap PA systems. You can't sing E because it won't come out very loud. You have to sing O. That'll come out loud. That O sound comes out really loud, but E sounds will disappear. So it was a kind of a mixture, wanting to be memorable, wanting to carry on the things I thought were distinctive in certain artists' records from the past, and the technical thing of defeating shitty PA systems. So it was mother of the mother of invention being it's a necessity really. As I got older, I just really it's that corny old thing of finding your own voice, and my own voice lives somewhere between. Well, it lives somewhere between Chet Baker and Paul McCartney. Or that's what I'd like to think. I aimed at Chet Baker, which I think his voice was before all the heavy dope ruined it. But Chet Baker's voice is just absolutely
divine.
Sublime. Yeah, really. He is the singing trumpet. His voice, have you noticed? His voice is identical to his trumpet playing. He can sing a phrase, then play the same phrase on the trumpet, and he puts the tremolo or vibrato in his voice to the same depth and in the same spot as he does when he puts that trumpet in his mouth. It's uncanny.
That man is an absolute triple threat and very handsome on top of it all. Which,
yeah, until the heroin kicked in. Let that be a lesson to male models. If you can afford heroin, don't.
So as a boy, was your voice much closer to the later voice that you had in XTC?
I didn't really sing much as a kid, to be honest, because I was pretty quiet and shy. If anything, I disappeared into the world of drawing and painting. In fact, that's what I thought my future was going to be. I thought, yeah, okay, when I get older, I'm gonna do something with art. My fantasy was I was going to be a comic artist and move to America and draw for Marvel or DC or something like that. More practically, I thought, well, I'll probably end up in an office somewhere doing graphic arts, doing ads, and maybe ultimately, romantically, I can, move somewhere and be a fine art painter or something like that. But then, my hormones kicked in and I became interested in girls, and I also opened up to music in a big way. And that guitar laying behind the sofa that my dad owned, I started pulling it out when he wasn't around. And how is he making that chord? Because my dad knew about half a dozen chords and had a rough kind of skiffle mentality. And I was, as a kid, I'd go there and sit in the cinema in my shorts and look at Hard Day's Night and Help. And then the Monkees came on the TV, and all that stuff really compounded. Kid, you're going to attract a lot more girls with a guitar than you are with a pencil. It was as simple as that. It was, the hormones were saying, go for the guitar. That's the big wooden fishing rod that will get you the gals.
That is a big motivator. Now, you grew up on a council estate, which would suggest there wasn't a great deal of disposable income. How often were you able to treat yourself to a record?
Once in a blue moon. I mean, relatives and friends would give me sort of battered records or old things from the, 78s, from the 40s and 50s. So for some reason, I inherited from someone or other a load of old, what's his name? Da 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 bang, these kind of comedy records.
Spike Jonze?
Spike Jonze, yeah. I inherited about half a dozen Spike Jonze records from some relative, so I played those to death. And I loved novelty records as a kid because that was the only thing on the radio that you could identify with as a kid. Although I didn't think I liked musicals. There were so many musicals played on the radio. It was the high point of the kind of South Pacific's, West Side Stories, Oklahoma, all that sort of crap, And although I didn't think I liked it, that stuff went in pretty deep. But I have to admit that the stuff I liked as a kid was the novelty records with crazy lyrics and too much reverb on the voice, or slapback echo effects, or sped up voices, or insane sounds,
The Foley effects and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I loved all that because when psychedelia kicked in, that was novelty records for teenagers. And so I was just making, and I think a lot of teenagers were making the jump from the crazy shit they used to like when they were kids to now they're 13, 14, 15 and up. They're digging the same equivalent for young people,
I would imagine those Spike Jonze records, those novelty records, you enjoyed listening to, but did you identify very much with them? Did they inspire you to want to make music?
No, I knew they were more connected to my parents and my grandparents. When I had a job delivering papers, paper round kind of thing, and I got a little money from that. And when it was my birthday or Christmas, relatives would say, "Oh, what would you like? What would you like for?" And I'd say, "Can I have a record token?" So, I'd store up these record tokens and go and buy a single. I think the first the first single I bought, I can't quite remember which one it was. It would have been 1968. The first one I bought with my own grabbings would have either been Jumping Jack Flash, the Rolling Stones, or Baby Come Back, the Equals, which I just loved, that thumping moronic kind of tremoloed bubblegum thing. But I did have records before then, because friends would lend me. I had an old record player that my dad was pretty handy with a soldering iron, so he bodged up a record player. And, friends would lend me, oh, you can lend this for a week, but I want it back. Or you can lend this for 2 weeks, and then my big brother's going to start beating me up because he doesn't know I've lent it to you, So, I would lend records, and I really got into the Small Faces singles and their B-sides, especially when they got to the Immediate label. I love that stuff.
You mentioned something that I hadn't heard before, a record token. What was a record token? Was this a system of saving up to buy records?
Oh, it was, you could go into a record store and you could purchase a record token to any amount of money, and they kind of put these quasi-money kind of stickers on it. And it was usually a card with these, like, tickets, official-looking tickets stuck in it. And then you give that to a person as the gift. The only sort of hammy thing about it is you can see how much it is. It's like 10 shillings or £1 or whatever. Mm-hmm. But that was fine by me, because I'd then use them to go into a record store and you could exchange it for the value of the record.
Right. Okay.
You got to have stuff like that in the States and Australia.
I just remember dealing with straight money. It sounds more like a gift card of some sort.
Yeah, that's kind of the equivalent. It was like a gift card.
Was it available at multiple stores? Could you take it to multiple stores, or was it just for one particular store?
No. It was. Although certain chains had their brand, you could exchange it. You could exchange it in any place that sold records. So it was great. But, I saved up several of these, and I think the first album I bought again was it was one of two things. It was either Sgt. Pepper's, or it was the Monkees' first album. I bought that by saving, hanging on to record tokens until I built up enough for an album,
At that time, were you interested in the songwriting aspect of the music? Like, would you read the liner notes and find out, who wrote which song and take an interest that way?
No, that was all a big confusion to me. It was kind of gibberish in the same way as, because if you liked a group, you would read every piece of print on that sleeve, even stuff that you didn't understand. What does that mean? It's laminated in clarifoil. What does the band want me to get from that? Laminated in clarifoil. What does that even mean? So they were like cryptic messages from the bands. So when I'd see names on there, I'd think, well, who's that name under the title? Who's he? I had no concept of who a producer was or what a songwriter was. I knew somebody had to write them, and I guessed, like the Beatles, it was one of the band, or the artist that sang it. When my parents had turned the radio up and there'd be Frank Sinatra singing, I think, oh, it's quite a good song that Frank's written. I didn't know, so I had no concept about that kind of thing. But you never know how anything of the process of record making happens. As a youngster, I used to think that when a record faded, they just, had one of those kind of rubber-wheeled dolly platforms like they do in film studios, and it had a big, long microphone on it, and they pulled that away silently, leaving the band playing in the far corner. And the band played quieter and quieter. So that was the combination of that was what a fade was. And I thought when there was a lot of reverb on a vocal, I knew something different was on that vocal. I assumed they were like shouting down a well, or they were shouting into a big brick or tiled room, like a bathroom, which, wasn't far off the truth, if the truth be known. But it's like the naive grasp of how are they doing that?
Now, by this time, you must have, been playing guitar and trying to figure out the songs of the Monkees or the Beatles or whoever's records you were playing at the time. Did you have much luck? Were you able to figure some of those songs out?
No, I was pretty crap at learning. Nobody told me the basics. Nobody said, well, there's the 3-chord trick. If you're playing in the key of G, the second chord is going to be C, your third chord's going to be D. Mm-hmm. Anything else is fancy dressing. Anything else is salad cream, I didn't know the principles, I'd try and work out chords, and I'd figure out with a lot of kind of rock and roll or blues songs and stuff, which were easier to play. I'd figure out that, okay, that's the chord of E, and then, oh yeah, he's going to an A next. And I a bit like the early Beatles, I had no concept of what B was, which is the third chord in the 3-chord trick of E, And I had nobody said, oh, you need to go to a B there. And, my father wouldn't give me lessons or anything. He showed me a few chords, but they were kind of pretty unconnected and probably closer to 1940s dance band music than what I wanted to learn, So I had no concept, and I even by the time I was in my first band at the age of 15, I was playing. We were doing covers of blues songs, but I was playing the wrong chords. Instead of E, A, and B, I'd play E, A, and D because I knew D, but nobody had shown me B. And Paul McCartney says that the Beatles had to get on a bus and go across Liverpool to learn the chord of B. I never had anyone that knew B. I mean, I learned it eventually, but I was a crap learner. And so what happened is I started writing songs because I was just crap at learning everybody else's. And it was that necessity thing. If I was in a band and I needed original material, well, you're going to have to write it, Andy. And it was as simple as that.
Now, you've spoken about your songwriting technique using synesthesia. What's the best way to describe synesthesia?
A muddling of the senses where you can kind of smell colors, or you can, when you hear a sound, it makes a color or it makes a sensation in your head. It's all your senses, the pathways get kind of wired so the smell doesn't go to smell or sound doesn't go to sound. Smell can go to colors can go to sound. They all get cross-wired everywhere, so they can go to other sensations as well.
Were you already employing that technique to write material or to play your songs as far back as Star Park or the Helium Kids?
I think I was, yeah. As I say, because I was crap at learning others' tunes, I still don't know the names of most of the chords that I use these days in writing, whether it's for myself or for other people, But in the early days of writing, I would just blunder, which has served me very well. Blundering, you can't underestimate blundering. 'Tis the British way. Make do and muddle through is should be on every British coat of arms. And that's what they do. They don't learn things properly. They just make do and muddle through. And that's what I was doing. I was throwing my fingers on a guitar and thinking, ooh, that's interesting. I've never heard that chord being used in a pop song before. And my knowledge of the classics wasn't strong enough to say, oh, yeah, that's Stravinsky was using that in bar 128 of the Blah Blah Symphony, I would throw my hands on a guitar and find this kind of interesting splang, thinking, wow, that's great. That's never been used before. And I would write a song around it because the splang would make me think of other things. Oh, that sounds like the seaside, or that sounds like a certain shaped car. And because the synesthesia would it's like a telephone exchange, and they're plugging you into the wrong numbers. Can I speak to Mrs. Smith? And they plugged you into Mr. Brown, and Mr. Brown is, or Mr. Wang there at the Chinese takeaway. It comes up. You come up with some interesting mismatches. So my early lyrics, in fact, my lyrics even now are usually me describing to myself what I'm blundering into on the instrument.
So you still use synesthesia for songwriting to this day?
Yeah, it doesn't stop. Your switchboard is badly soldered, and that's it. You just got to go with it.
Are there many other artists you've found that also use this method?
I tend not to question. I mean, I don't know many other artists. Most musicians bore the shit out of me, to be honest, because that's usually all they ever want to talk about. But I've never sat one down and said, "Hey, do you get that thing where you play a chord and you can smell onions or whatever it is?" I've not really done that with other musicians.
You've talked about synesthesia for songwriting, but where else in your life does it come in? And is it sometimes a nuisance or sometimes a blessing in other parts of your life?
It's never been a nuisance. It's helped out with lyrics, because if you're writing lyrics, you can see. With me, I like designing a stage set. The chords make the place. And once you've got the place, I'm making this stage set for the audience to sit and look at. What are you going to see? Well, you're going to see boulders each side and maybe a little bit of a hillock to the left. And then we go down and you can see a hazy sea on the right. You start describing to yourself what you're seeing in the music. And then that gives you the visuals, and it makes the lines for the actors to say. It's very difficult to describe, because if you don't have a messed up switchboard, it's going to be tricky to grasp.
Well, it sounds very much like what you've described is creating a little world for this song, this composition, complete with dialogue and interaction between characters and things in the environment, which sounds like it could be related to your interest in comic books. I mean, isn't that kind of what comic book does? Kind of,
but because I was a poor reader at school, they were worried about him. He seems bright, but he struggles with reading. They kept me back for special lessons. I wasn't a reader. I mean, hell for me was when the teacher would say, "Okay, we're going to work our way through Lorna Doone, and I want you to read 2 chapters by Monday." And it was like, oh, no. Because I don't know whether I was some sort of Asperger's or autistic or whatever it was. I'm on the spectrum somewhere, I know that. But I never got it tested, and my parents never got it tested. But reading was I would panic. I would open a page of print, and it was like a huge dark lake that I was falling into, and I didn't want to go near it. So I preferred books with pictures, because I could get all the information from the picture. I didn't need to read anything in the print. And my favorite thing as a kid visually was an educational magazine called Look and Learn. And what it was is they used to get Britain's top artists and graphic designers, and there'd be beautiful paintings and illustrations on every page. And it was an educational magazine, and every page was a different subject, a history thing, a science thing, whatever, But they were profusely illustrated, and I would sit and absorb every panel and every brushstroke, every mark of these drawings, and get all the information I needed, which I swear is why I love history. I read profusely these days, and I've got over the Black Lake panic, but that didn't happen until I left school. Literally, the moment I left school at 15, walked out the front gates of the school, and I thought, I don't have to read anymore. I don't have to do the bidding of these people saying, you must read this. Wow, I want to read a book. The second I left the school gates, I wanted to read.
Now, were you already playing in bands when you left school?
I started in the first band kind of on a very amateur level at the age of 15, because I was a precocious talent with my art. I got into Swindon College. They let me in a year early. They shouldn't have let me in until I was 16, but they let me in at 15 because I was what they called precocious, And when I got into college, I was hanging around with older kids, and I said, I'm learning guitar, and some days I'd take a guitar, an acoustic guitar, into the college.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to know people. Yeah, I want to start a band up. You want to? Oh, I don't have an electric guitar. Oh, don't worry, my mate's he's got a spare one, and he can't play. I'm sure he'd loan it to you. And oh, I don't have an amplifier. Oh, we can rustle one. I know someone who can get one from a youth club and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I was in my first band at 15, going into 16, and it was all organized by an older kid who had a beard, for God's sakes. I barely had pubic hair, and he's got a beard, and he ended up working in the tax office for some reason. But he was obsessed with Jethro Tull, who'd just come on the scene, and he wanted a blues band. And I said, "Yeah, I can play blues." I didn't tell him I couldn't play that mystery third chord, And so we'd play gigs, bashing through blues numbers, him on harmonica, me playing guitar, and a couple of other kids on bass and drums. We were dreadful. I mean, really awful, terrible, The audience would plead with us to get off. And we played at a local dance hall that was connected to a big department store called McIlroy's. And I think it was Monday or Tuesday nights. Monday night, I think. They would have like new bands night. And we borrowed a load of equipment, and kids said, "Oh, those skinheads in the audience, they're going to hate you because you've got some hair and you play bluesy sounding things. They're really going to hate you, and they throw coins. It's painful." And so I thought, shit, I wonder if I can borrow a 100-watt stack from a DJ that I know. If the coins start flying, I can hide behind it. And so we did this gig, and we got one number in, and the DJ said, "Look, mate, you're terrible. You got to stop." And the singer begged him on bended knee, "Look, please let us do one more number, please." "Oh, okay, but then you've got to stop." "Okay." So we got part of the way into this second number, and the coins started flying, and Jesus, they were really painful. And yeah, that borrowed 100-watt stack came in useful, because I was sat playing kind of bottleneck guitar on my lap, because I knew how to do that. That was kind of easy to do. You rub this glass thing or this shiny plastic thing or metal thing up the strings, and it sounds like old blues records.
Yeah.
I'm sat there on a folding chair looking like Brian Jones with a pudding bowl haircut. And the skinheads are throwing pennies, and Jesus, they really hurt. And so I'm kind of, as I'm playing, I'm slowly shuffling the chair around behind the Marshall speakers so I can't get hit. I borrowed my own barricades. But we got a couple of minutes into the second song, and the DJ just pulled the plug and just played a record really loud to drown us out.
Sounds like you got a lot of pennies out of it.
Exactly, yeah. And then they threaten you for them later on. "Oh, I'll chuck money at you, mate. You better give me that back right now."
So were you on record? Did you make a record at all before XTC?
No, only demo tapes. XTC became XTC in 75. Before then, we were the Helium Kids. We did one show as the Snakes because we wanted a new start, but there was just one gig as the Snakes, as far as I can remember. But 75, I thought, no, we gotta leave this kind of archaic rock and roll behind and get back to the essence of what made pop music great, which were short songs delivered sharply and succinctly, very melodically, and with interesting angles and interesting chords, and almost like some sort of future jazz had been melded into pop music, And so I came up with a concept of we needed a short, sharp name. So I was watching the TV one night. I was still living at home with my parents, and there was an old Jimmy Durante, the American comedian, Snozzle Durante. "You spoke like this.
Cha-cha-cha-cha.
Yeah, that one. So he's playing this song called something like the Lost Chord, and he finds this outrageous chord. It's probably like a real gorgeous jazz chord now, but it was kind of really outrageous in the song that he was playing. And he says, "That's it. I found it. I'm in XTC." And I thought, what does he mean, XTC? And I said, "Dad, what does that mean, XTC?" "Oh, it's ecstasy, isn't it? He's saying he's found a chord, he's in ecstasy." I thought, wow. And I wrote it down on a scrap of paper, XTC, ecstasy. Oh, yeah. Wow, that looks great. It's like a Chinese, calligraphic kind of symbol, or it's like a company logo, or it's like the sort of thing you'd see on the side of an alien spacecraft or something. I thought, that is great. It's this pictogram for a name, ecstasy. Wow, we got to call the band that. So I put all this over to the rest of the band, and they said, okay, that's pretty good. And I said, we got to look futuristic. I think we should all get white boiler suits, which were pretty cheap. You could buy workman's clothes cheap. So we all got white boiler suits, and excuse me, my stomach's rumbling. What's that you say? Secret of the universe? Where the gold's buried? Sure. I swallowed a BBC announcer earlier in the day. So this we all got these white boiler suits, and I got them to paint Chinese letters, kanji kani or whatever they're called, kanji.
Katakana,
that sort of stuff. I got them to paint those. We either had white boiler suits with black kanji kana on, or we had black boiler suits with white kanji kana, and we were like these, future.
It's almost Devo-esque.
Yeah, well, we didn't know Devo existed. This was 75. We were in a council estate in Swindon, and of course, we used to. The only gigs we could get really were local working men's clubs, and they didn't know what the hell. As long as we played loads of covers, they didn't care, and we got paid. But that was really the start of XTC. Was wanting to make a new kind of music using what was best about the old kind of music. The succinctness of Beatles songs, the melody of Beatles songs, the forward-looking kind of art thing of futurism or Dadaism, or do you know what I mean? I wanted to combine all the shit I liked.
And in 77, I believe XTC signed with Virgin.
Yeah, we were making demo tapes. We made a bunch of demos in 75, early 76 in a studio in Reading, ironically called Sun. So for the rock and roll connection there. So we did these half a dozen recordings in Sun Studios, and we started sending them out to record companies. Couldn't get anyone to bite, and we sent some to John Peel, the DJ, BBC DJ, and he really loved this cassette we sent. And he said the thing that really got him the most was I drew this poster because I would. Used to fantasize about being a comic artist. I drew this poster of, I'm trying to remember which, there were several variations, but one of them showed a rotting android zombie robot creature kissing this Hollywood starlet. And there was a kind of a list of stuff down the side of this pretend comic cover saying, insects, iron, lust, rays. And he thought that was really fascinating. And we managed to blag a gig upstairs at Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club in London that had rock bands upstairs. And he came along to the gigs purely on the strength of these cassette demos and this poster with insects, iron, lust, and rays on it. And he came and at the end of the night said, can you come and do a session on my radio show and on the BBC? So we were overjoyed, went and did this session. We had no record deal or anything. Went and did this session. Of course, record companies well, who's this band that we've never heard of doing a session on the BBC for John Peel? And so that was it. They were all started saying, we want to sign you.
And what made you decide on Virgin rather than the others? I think Harvest and Island was in there.
It's a very easy thing to explain. We picked up a manager, or he rather leached onto us. He ran nightclubs in Birmingham originally, and I think he was on the fringes of Birmingham gangland. And he moved to Swindon and was running a club in Swindon. And a friend of his who used to work in the early 60s in pop media said to him, oh, you want to sign that band up before someone else does? They're going to be big. And so this fella stepped in and said, oh, I want to sign you chaps up, you know. And we thought, wow, we've got a manager. And, the timing was appalling, really, because there were all these labels saying, we want to sign you. There was Harvest, who wanted to sign us, Island, which we thought, yeah, fantastic, great. You know, we loved a lot of the stuff on Island. And a label called Virgin, who we were not really familiar with. Oh, didn't they do that Faust album that was the price of a single? And didn't they do Tubular Bells and a few other things? So we didn't really know who Virgin were. We were all excited about going with, I think Polydor might have been in the mix. We were all excited about going with Island. And then at a gig in London, our manager brought his rather snooty wife along. And the A&R man, or one of the A&R men from Ireland, was getting a little too refreshed at the bar and said something to our manager's wife, which she found very offensive. Mind you, she was very easy to offend and a joy to offend. But he said something offensive in his drunken way. And the manager, well, that's it. We're not signing with your label. How dare you say that in front of my wife, type thing. And so that was it. That killed off our Island ambitions. So it was like, oh, I suppose it's Virgin then. So, yeah. So that's...
And is this pre or post Sex Pistols Virgin?
It's all around about the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So we signed to Virgin in the summer of 1977. I think they were panicking. They were thinking, whoa, this new musical movement's happening. We better sign up everything that moves, you know. And I've said before, but seriously, if you played an accordion and stood in a bath of custard, you would have been signed in 1977 because you would have been a punk accordionist. It was the desperation not to miss this money-making thing, this potentially money-making thing.
Now, do you think when Virgin signed you, the expectations of the band and the label were aligned?
No. They wanted big pop success in a kind of punky fashion, but they wanted top 10 singles constantly.
They wanted safe punk.
They wanted there's a format that's never been done. Yeah, they don't put razor blades through their ears. They put like cotton buds, something else safer from the bathroom. They wanted kind of colourful and safe punk, and we were more interested in stretching the boundaries somewhat, and I think we were more interested in being in what you might call an album band. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we did love great pop singles. So somewhere in the mess is what XTC became.
Now, how did they try to shape you in the early years?
Oh, it was all, you've got to go on these kids' TV shows because that's where the pop music is, Mm-hmm. And so we were always being put on. We felt kind of uncomfortable because there you are playing to or miming usually because TV shows didn't want to be fucked about with getting a live sound. Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll play the record, you mime. Shouldn't I have a cable plugged into my guitar? No, don't worry about it, mate. No one cares. So, we found ourselves miming mostly on an awful lot of TV shows. And you look out and the oldest people in the audience are like 9. And it was, of course, our management's getting all excited. Oh, great! You've got to do a matinee tour. Your next tour has got to include matinees where you play to kids and there's no bar and their parents bring them. And it's, oh, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
We saw ourselves as a cross between Captain Beefheart's Magic Band and the Monkees. And here we are being pushed into the Archies mold, which is even lower down the scale.
Now, around this time, there was a 7-inch copy of Science Friction that was released that is highly collectible in the vinyl community. You're familiar with that 7-inch, I imagine?
Kind of, yeah. I'm a bit confused as to what all that means, but...
Yeah, apparently this record was put out and it was withdrawn rather quickly and then replaced with a 7-inch or with a 12-inch version of the song.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as a 12-inch because that's... I don't know if I ever even saw a 7-inch. I got my 12-inch the day that we received our 12 inches at Virgin headquarters. I was left alone in an office with a box of about a dozen of these. I thought, wow, I've made a record, and here I am in the office of the head of the record company, and okay, he's gone for a shit or whatever, but I've got a box of 12-inch singles. Wow! And then into the room walked Peter Cook, comedian, who was, probably negotiating the deal with signing Derek and Clive, which was him and Dudley Moore, signing up to Virgin, and was probably hoping to meet Richard Branson there. So he wandered in, and I thought, Jesus, that's one of my comedy heroes. That's Peter Cook. I thought, I'd love his autograph, but all I've got are these 3D EP 12-inch singles. So I pulled one of them out and said, excuse me, could you sign this for me? And he grabbed a pen off of Richard Branson's desk and wrote, regards Clive on it. And I thought, who the fuck's Clive? Because I didn't know about Derek and Clive.
Right.
But so somewhere in the attic, I've got the 12-inch 3D EP. It's signed Clive.
Yeah, the 7-inch Science Friction, it's on the other side is She's So Square, and apparently it was cut and then withdrawn. So that 7-inch goes sometimes for thousands of dollars.
Yeah, I've heard it's. I have a free subscription, aren't I lucky, to Record Collector, and there's an article, 200 most collectible records. And I was flicking through on the crapper the other day, and I blundered. There it is. There's Science Fiction 7-inch, £2,500. Yeah, that's crazy. To me, it's you can pick up a battered 12-inch of it for a pound or two, and there's people selling this 7-inch version for $2,500, and that I don't know. That doesn't seem to be value added to me.
No. So you don't recall the story, you don't recall it being withdrawn, none of that?
No, because to be honest, they would pick the singles, and it was, this track's going to be your next single, this one's going to be the one after it, and all that kind of stuff. And our protestations were met with, well, we're the record label.
It sounds like they made majority of the release decisions. How about the artwork? So, for instance, the
artwork started. Statue of Liberty single was them doing it, and I got to see it. And the only thing that we contributed was I drew a logo that looked like a face. The XTC logo looks like a face kind of looking back at you. And, there is Mr. XTC heading off into the future, giving you a cursory glance over his shoulder, And they put that smack in the center of an otherwise mostly white photo sleeve of the Statue of Liberty. And I thought, Jesus, that is crap. Why didn't they ask me to do it? Because I that's my training, is the visual side of things, and locked in with the music and see synesthesia. And after that, we had a bit of a row, and I insisted that I do all the sleeves from then on. And we got to the second album, I was arguing so much with Barry Andrews, who really wanted to sort of take the band over, to be frank. And he didn't want me designing the sleeves, so Virgin suggested a compromise where we get a well-known company that does that sort of thing to design the sleeves. So we went to meet Hypnosis on Denmark Street in London, Tin Pan Alley. And their way of doing things was not to design something to request. The name of our records is My Pants Have Exploded. Can you design a sleeve for My Pants Have Exploded? They wouldn't work on that sort of basis. They would just design a whole load of stuff with no titles in mind or no connection to anything. And then when an artist or a band went to see them, they would lay all of these out on the floor and it would be there, pick one. So they laid out like a dozen sleeves on the floor, and I thought, don't like these. These are kind of the past. These look like early 70s things to me. The sort of things that prog bands would go for. This was the sort of stuff we were trying to leave behind.
Yeah, a lot of those Hypnosis covers seem to have a very similar kind of feel and notion about them, which was why I was surprised when I saw Go 2 was designed by them.
Yeah, well, it was the same two people. They'd both be into photography and they'd both be into the big budget sort of thing of, let's fly to the desert and lay 1,000 chrome-plated lavatories out in the desert, that sort of shit. And we went to see them, and they laid out all these things on the floor, and we all thought, this is difficult because we're not liking any of these, And I think they cleared all those away and laid out the second team 11, and we didn't really like any of those either. And it was all kind of, oh, God, I wish the floor would open up and swallow us, We said, well, let's think about it and we'll get back to you, knowing full well we didn't like anything we'd seen. And we were walking out of the office and we had to pass this huge old Victorian fireplace type thing with a big old mantelpiece on it. And right in the middle of this mantelpiece, there was nothing else on this mantelpiece. Right in the middle of this mantelpiece was a 12 by 12 sheet of black card covered in writing. And as we were leaving, this caught our eye, and we started reading this, and it explains the job that a record sleeve should do, the job that a perfect record sleeve should do. And we're all stood there in front of this fireplace reading this thing with the door open and them kind of embarrassingly kind of trying to throw us out. And I said, what's this? And they said, well, that's the office joke. Someone designed that and just as a joke. And of course, we put it there to remind us what the perfect sleeve should be, And I said, we really like that. Can we have that? And they said, well, you don't want that, do you? It's a joke, No, we really like that. Oh, well, every band that we ever brought that up to turns it down. No, wow, really? Yeah, we even showed it to Pink Floyd and they rejected it. Great, we want it. And it was like a sort of a badge of honor, this Dada thing. It was anti-art. And if these big bands had all turned it down, that kind of made it even more attractive to us. And so we got over the Barry Andrews not wanting me to design the sleeve to we found the perfect anti-sleeve just by accident.
And the record label, they didn't put up much of a fight for it?
No, because it was designed by Hypnosis.
Okay.
It's like the brand, the Hypnosis brand.
It came from Hypnosis. It must be good.
Yeah, they were hypnotized into saying it was good,
So Hypnosis did Go 2. For the next few albums, Drums and Wires, The Black Sea, how engaged was the band in selecting the art, the aesthetics of the release?
Oh, it was everything. I mean, the Drums and Wires cover, originally Drums and Wires was going to be called Boom Dada Boom. There's the Dada and was that just sort of mucking around. We used to buy these kids' comics and leave handfuls of them around the studio. I mean, real young kids' comics. And there was a famous one in England called Beano. You know, it's aimed at little kids, and we just have these stupid comics around the studio for a laugh. You know, oh, have you seen what blah da da da's up to? Oh, really stupid, you know. And there was a character called Dennis the Menace, different to the American Dennis the Menace.
Mm-hmm.
He too wears a striped T-shirt, jumper type thing, and he's got a dog called Nasher, and Nasher plays the drums. And we knew we were making a drum-heavy album. We wanted a drum-heavy, guitar-orientated album. And this one frame in this comic of Nasher banging 7 shades of shit out of this drum kit was all primary colors, really primitively drawn. And I thought, that is great. And the only words above this Nasher hitting the drums was boom, da, da, boom. And I thought, fuck, that's the title for the album. Boom, da, da, boom. So for a while, for a few days, we were making boom, da, da, boom. And then somebody said, oh, you wanna use that? I said, yeah, can we cut that frame out of the comic, blow it up? Love the primary colors of it, so we'll blow it up to 12 by 12 size, and the album's going to be called Boom Da Da Boom, and we put XTC, the XTC face logo or whatever, on his bass drum, you know. And somebody said, oh, you know what, you don't want to do that because DC Thompson, the Scottish company that owns Beano, they're notoriously litigious. They will not let anyone, a bit like Disney, you know, they will not let anyone purloin any of their copyright in any way. You're gonna find that really difficult. And then Virgin said, no, you can't do that. They're gonna be a problem. And so it was, shit, we're coming to the end of making this album now. And we had Boom Da Da Boom, which was perfect, and the primary colors was perfect. What are we going to do? And I thought, well, let's go with that XTC face logo, the one that was on the front of the cretinous-looking Statue of Liberty sleeve. Let's blow that up real big and do it in primary colors. And so Virgin hired an artist called Jill Mumford, sent her down to the studio, and I said, look, this is the XTC logo. Can you make it in primary colors? And, 12 by 12 is what we're aiming for. And she went away and, brought it back to the studio. And it was like, yeah, that'll do. So it was a last minute kind of grab. But I guess it became a bit iconic. Well, certainly the band Toto thought so.
Yeah. I was going to say, a lot of commonalities there.
Yeah. Black Sea was a case of, again, we were making an album that we all agreed. I was reading a book about Victorian navvies building London, and the song Towers of London was one of the results of that. But I really liked the idea of a lot of the work was done under the Thames, building tunnels that would make the underground and building bridges. And a lot of the work had to be done under the Thames and was very dangerous, And so I thought, wow, diving suits, Victorian navvies, diving suits, great looking image, kind of like, and it wasn't called steampunk at the time, kind of like what became steampunk, a steampunk sort of Sergeant Pepper type look, We're all stood there like a Victorian family portrait of the working man, but these are the people that are building London. And we all decided that the album was going to be the concept for the look of it. And the title was going to be called Work Under Pressure, which was perfect for the divers, because they were working under pressure and dying, but building Victorian London, the gem of the empire, So we had this photo session done. We hired a load of old diving suits, and a local Swindon artist called Ken White painted this huge backdrop that was like a giant sort of engraving backdrop of a stormy sea and stormy clouds. And he included XTC in a seagull, a ship's mast, and a balloon. And we stood in front of this in these diving suits, thought, great, work under pressure. We've got the cover, fantastic. The manager, the eponymous manager, came into the studio in the last few days and said, Andy, I'd like a word with you. And he took me in the little airlock. When you go into a studio, a lot of them have like a kind of an airlock where you go into one door and then you have this no man's land area. Then you have another sealed door that goes in. And that's how they keep the studios soundproof, you know. So he took me in this airlock area where nobody can hear what you're saying, you know. And he said, look, I've seen the photo session. Lovely, looking great, very iconic. But I can't allow you to use the title Work Under Pressure. And I said, why not? You know, that's why we've done the whole look of the thing.
It ties it all together.
Yeah. Well, it makes me look really terrible. It makes me look like I'm working you poor chaps to death. And I thought, well, yeah, you are. You know, we never got any time off, but that's a whole other conversation. We were constantly touring, constantly playing live, or constantly writing, recording, rehearsing for recording, doing TV stuff, doing press stuff, whatever it was. We never had a second off. And so we all mischievously thought Work Under Pressure was the perfect title. But he said, I absolutely forbid you to use the title Work Under Pressure. And that was it. He left. And I thought, shit, what are we going to do? You know, the record's coming out. It's due to be finished in like 5 days' time or whatever, you know, and we've got another last-minute thing here. And I just panicked and grabbed the title Black Sea. It didn't really mean anything. I mean, the very first album we were supposed to do was called Black Music, not White Music. It was called Black Music, as in black humor, black vinyl. But Virgin said, no, you're not calling your album that. Why not? Well, because people will think you're a soul band or a funk band, and you're obviously not black. Well, yeah, but black humor, black vinyl. No, you're not calling it black music. What do you want to call it? And I just panicked and said, well, all right, white music. It didn't mean anything. You know, I just thought I'll say the opposite. And so I don't know whether part of me thought Black Sea was somehow reinstating the black vinyl thing or black humor, but I just panicked and said, well, it's obviously got to have some nautical connotation. Okay, Black Sea. And the band just said, oh, okay, all right. But it should have been Work Under Pressure.
And so each of those records came with this green sleeve, at least the early pressings did. What was the purpose? What was the discussion around that?
I think I used to love this thing called a jamboree bag or a lucky bag, which was 3 pennies, 3 cents. And it was a colored, usually green or pink, cheap paper bag that had a Boy Scout printed on the front. And then it was a surprise thing. There was a cheap plastic toy in it, a couple of inedible cheap sweets. But I used to love the whole concept of that. And this thing of something surprising inside the cheap paper bag. And I also think I felt a little bit ashamed of, there we were in diving outfits, but we weren't working under pressure. You know, so part of me wanted to hide the failed image, and part of me wanted this thing of, there's a wonderful surprise inside this cheap paper bag. And I thought, yeah, it's got to be that cheap looking green as well.
Even with the record company throwing you some of these curveballs, you seem to have been quite successful at convincing them to do these ideas, where adding that cheap bag, I mean, all of it would add cost to it. I imagine those weren't all easy conversations, but you're quite effective at it.
Well, they were easy conversations because we didn't know we were being charged for everything. You know, we'd say, let's give away a free dub album. Okay, yeah, no problem. You know, they just, behind the scenes, they'd just charge us.
Okay.
You know, studio time, yeah, charge it to the band. Sleeve design, charge it to the band. You know, pressing costs, blah, blah, blah. Vinyl cost, blah, blah. Promotion, da-da. Shipping, yeah, da-da. Oh, the whole thing. We didn't know. We were being charged for everything. So they were saying, you know, I'd go to them and say, No thugs in our house. Yeah, I want a Pollock's paper theater. So it's a 3D theater that you open up and it's like a Pollock's Victorian paper theater, and the lyric is the script of the play you're meant, and then you get the cut out characters, and you can enact the story, what's going on in the song with the paper characters. Yeah, sure, anything you want to do. We were being charged. The Life Begins at the Hop single, I said, let's have a plastic cover you see through, and you see our previous single on the turntable of the record player, and then over the top of the clear plastic sleeve, you print the arm that is playing the current disc, which is Life Begins at the Hop. And yeah, anything you want. They didn't say, look, this is off the scale in expenses. You've got this expensive, thick plastic sleeve. You've got a screen print part of the record player on top of that. It was, nothing was ever explained. It was all, yeah, anything you want to do, because we were paying for it unbeknown to us.
Now, at this time, do you control all the XTC recordings?
No, we never will. Virgin got eaten up by EMI, bigger fish came in. Mm-hmm. EMI got eaten up by Universal, even bigger fish came in. And so Universal own the XTC catalog for perpetuity. When we signed that deal, none of us had ever heard the word perpetuity before. I had no idea what it meant.
So when you release something like the Steven Wilson remixes,
yeah,
is that profitable for the band?
It is.
Okay.
It is actually. We run on something like 5%. Universal I think it's an 8% override. They lease our own music back to us temporarily. We pay to get it mixed in surround. We pay them probably more than we take because they're the owner of the music. But it pays, it pays for the groceries, so we can't knock it. And it turns on a lot of people that never would have checked out XTC. People are on these sites on the internet saying, I normally wouldn't listen to XTC, but I love Yes, and I love Jethro Tull or whatever it is. And a friend of mine said, Steven Wilson's doing the XTC catalog. So I checked them out. I'm really loving that too. How come I didn't know about these fellas? And so it's turning people onto us that would have gone near us, which is great, because if you like what we do, fantastic. If you don't like what we do, fuck you. It's great. It's really good that oldies and youngies, teenagers are saying, wow, I never knew who this band were. They're fantastic. So that's great.
So this is probably a good time to let people know that they can go to ape.uk.net.
Yes, or they can go to burningshed. Oh, God, I can't remember their address now. Burningshed dot something.
Just go to a burning shed. There'll be records.
If they go to Ape, it'll lead them on to Burning Shed. But you can get everything that's available there. But no, unfortunately, we don't own the XTC catalog. But I think we're doing a good job with vinyl and with 5.1s and stuff. And Steven Wilson is totally devoted to this project. He's doing great work.
Oh, yeah. Oh, amazing. Has he gone all the way through the XTC catalog? Is there anything left that he hasn't done?
No. What we're doing, there's no rhyme or reason to what's being done. It's not chronological, or it's not the one with the most letters in the name or anything. There's no reason to it. It's all to do with which multi-track tapes can be found. And several of the albums are, inverted commas, missing.
Which albums are missing?
English Settlement, Mummer, and I think Big Express. And for many years, Skylarking was missing, inverted commas. Mm-hmm. And Todd Rundgren, oh God, I said that name, sorry.
I didn't bring it up. Let's just note that.
Okay. TR, when asked repeatedly, said, no, I don't have the master tapes. We thought, well, that's unusual, because he keeps the master tapes to everything he's ever worked on. And a fan went to see him in upstate New York, and found his studio, and he got cornered and sort of let them in and chatted to them. And she said, "Oh, can I take some photographs in here? It's great in here." He said, "Yeah, sure." And at one end of the studio are shelves and shelves of multi-track tapes. And she took some photos of the stuff on these shelves. And I got to see one of these photos. A friend of a friend sent it to me. And TR was denying owning the master tapes or having the master tapes, the Skylarking. And I got to see this photograph there on the shelf. There's the boxes for Skylarking. And it's a long roundabout story, but we eventually tracked them down. He signed to Columbia or something like that, and all his tapes ended up in storage in New York City. And where they were eventually tracked down in Columbia, which was weird because we had no dealings with Columbia.
Oh, Columbia, the company, not South America.
No. Columbia, the company. Oh, don't get into South America. Don't ask me about the PA system from the bottom of the sea. So, but no, the story was that our tapes ended up with his tapes being stored in Columbia in New York City, and they were tracked down there. But for years, he denied he had them, which was patently not true, because he was caught out in a fan photo, you know.
So you don't know if any of those missing tapes may have been part of the Universal Music Fire, do you? Is there any chance of that?
We suspect not, but we can't be for sure.
Okay.
But we really don't know.
So for those albums, English Settlement, Mummer, and Big Express, you can't do any remixes. It's only just remasters. Is that right?
Well, what you could do, there's a system called Pentio, which is like a very fancy version of the old mono reprocessed for stereo, where that used to just split. I don't know if you knew what that was. That whenever you saw that on an album, mono reprocessed for stereo, it was the mono signal split up into frequency bands. You know, everything up to a certain frequency would be on one side, everything above that frequency would be on the other side, everything above another frequency would be back on the first side again, and everything at the very top would be, you know, so you got lows and high mids on one side, and you got mids and ultra highs on the other side. And that was like a way of cheating your ears into stereo. But there's a system called Pentio where you can put a stereo recording through this, and this does like a much fancier version of that frequency splitting.
Now, on ape.uk.net, many of the releases boast that they've been corrected. What does that mean, corrected?
Well, no, the only one that's been corrected is Skylarking, because when we weren't, I don't want to drag up the misery of me and Todd not getting on, but let's just say he did a pretty good job in the long run. We'll leave it at that. But we weren't allowed to be at the mixing. So we went back to England grumbling and groaning, and he posted the mixes over, and Virgin didn't like them, the band didn't like them, and so he reluctantly agreed to mix some again. And then he sent those over and said, well, that's it. I'm not doing any more. I'm not doing any more work. So there's dedication to duty. And we were stuck with, okay, well, that's going to have to be it then. And we then said, well, okay, send over the stereo mix and we'll get it mastered. And I like to attend the masterings whenever possible because there's so much you can do, you know? So the master room, which was a suite of mastering rooms in London, was booked. And the engineer that was booked for us was, God, what was his name? I can see him, and who couldn't see him because he was the double of Muammar Gaddafi. Seriously, if you'd have said, well, this is Mr. Gaddafi, you would have said, shit, what's he doing in here? No, he was the double of Gaddafi, but he had a great set of ears, and he ran this master rooms. So, yeah, Aaron, that was his name, Aaron. I can't remember his second name, but Aaron was his first name. So I walked down there into the basement, and he's he's got it all done out like a kind of Arabic palace down there. There was a big gold palm tree in there and everything. So very unnerving. You felt like you were in Gaddafi's love tent, you know. And he put the album up. So I said, Andy, he said, I've been playing this tape before you got here. He said, is this right? Is this the mixes that I've got to work with? And we said, well, yeah, sorry. He said, but there's no bass on it. And at the top, it all gets really kind of indistinct. And I don't know what I can do with this. And I said, well, look, do what you can. And so we sat there all day, and he's trying to find this kind of non-existent bass. And he's trying to give a center to the tops. It just sounded, everything sounded far away. And he said, well, that's the best I can do with it. And it was a case of, well, okay, we're going to have to go with that. And so that became the sound of the Skylarking album. And then a few years ago, we got hold of a copy. It wasn't even the original one. We got hold of a copy of the stereo mix tape of Skylarking. And a master called John Dent, who was like a genius in my mind, he ran a studio called Loud, and he got the tape, and he called me up, and I was thinking he's going to say, oh my God, is this what I've got to work with? You know, I thought it was going to be Aaron too, you know. And he called me up and said, Andy, been listening to this stereo mix of the Skylarking album, and I thought, hold on, Andy, he's going to say it. And he said, why is it out of polarity? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, this tape, the polarity on this tape is out of whack. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he gave me a long technical spiel. And I said, oh, hell. And he said, well, it's a common, he told me a story about Compass Point Studio in Nassau. When they built Compass Point Studio, he worked for Island at the time. And he said that all the tapes that came from Compass Point, the polarity was out of whack. And so they sent an engineer down to Compass Point, and the engineer found that approximately 50% of the wiring was faulty, not faulty, but that it was going to the wrong junctures. You know, lives were going to earths were going to neutrals, all this sort of thing. And I said to him, so what happened? He said, well, they corrected all the wiring in Compass Point. Then everything that came out of it sounded $1 million. So I said, well, what do we do with Skylarking then? He said, well, don't worry. I've got a machine here. It's basically a box with a combination of switches, which will do every combination of where things should go and what things should be. And I can kind of get back to what the polarity really should have been. He said it probably sounded great in Todd's studio, but he said there's probably misguided wiring in that studio. So when it comes out of that studio in the real world, it sounds thin with no low end, and the tops are going to sound distant. And I said, yes, that's it. He said, well, look, I'll mess around here until I get it sounding. And when I heard it, it was like day and night. You know, it sounded like it did in Todd's studio. It sounded fine. But Todd Rundgren swears to this day that, oh, that's all bullshit. That polarity thing, that's all bullshit. That's just to convince you to buy it again. There's nothing wrong with my mix. No, his studio was out of whack. And he's just too
prideful.
Yeah, to admit it. Come on. John Dent said, don't worry about it. He said, roughly 1 in 4 tapes that I get are going to be out of polarity because of dodgy studio wiring. He said, we can sort it out. So, yeah, that's the only one that's been corrected is Skylarking, and that is all down to, sadly, he died, but the late John Dent was a mastering genius. I think.
Save that box, whatever that is that he
really, yeah.
So I'm very pleased to see that Nonsuch is coming out on vinyl, and it's perhaps my favorite XTC record. When you go through these albums, are you rediscovering parts that you haven't thought about since you recorded it originally? Are you finding different tracks on the multi-track that you're now bringing out front? Anything like that?
No, what usually happens is I don't play our music. I mean, who plays their own music? It's
Mm-hmm.
To a large extent, it's the act of making recorded music. In fact, the act of any art is to shit it out and move on.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't get rid of it, if you keep going back to your vomit like a dog, you never move on, you know? And so I tend not to listen to too much of our previous recordings because I don't need to, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's for other people who like it and have not discovered it yet or whatever. But we have to go through albums before they're re-released to check mastering, to check that we like the sound of things. Do I like the fact that those frequencies have been reduced and those have been highlighted? Do I like the fact that there's less limiting on this track? And da-da-da. You know, there's a million different tweaks you can do. So, you know, I have to sit with headphones, and sometimes I'm sat there listening and I'm thinking, bloody hell, this band are good. You know, and I'm kind of forgetting it's my band because it's, you know, some of this stuff is like 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary because you forget what you've done and you end up thinking, yeah, that was great. Who is it? Oh, it's us. So it can be a delight. It can be a real delight. But, you know, you tend not to wallow in your own stuff.
Mm. Can you appreciate the music? Like maybe step outside and enjoy it as a fan, or do you listen to it and kind of start picking it apart about things you could have done differently?
Yeah, when I drank a lot more, I hardly drink these days because I have a faulty heart. That the rhythm of my heart is. I'm getting an operation. Let's not go there. But when I used to drink a lot more, I would occasionally, about once a month or so, it's like a male period. I would get completely blotto. And I'd go through this barricade. I'd break through this barricade where I'd be, shit, I want to hear such and such an album by XTC. And then what had happened is I'd go out to my shed studio. I'd lay on the floor with headphones on, crank it up, put that album on, and I'd probably pass out by halfway through side 2. And then awake a couple of hours later and it's still going round, you know. Mm. But I would honestly hear it because you'd broken through this mental barrier. You'd like hear it for the first time, which could be very strange because you are hearing somebody that isn't you. You are hearing it not with your ears and not with your sensibility. You are hearing somebody that isn't you. You are hearing a band that's not XTC. You are hearing kind of brand new music made by somebody else. It's very strange. And it only ever happened to me when I'd be on the verge of passing out drunk that you could get into this different mindset of not being you. So I know that's an odd answer, but it's truthful.
Yeah. Okay. Look, again, I want to be respectful of your time, Andy, and I'd love to have you back on sometime because we haven't even touched on the Dukes and the Fuzzy Warbles and all sorts of other things.
Hey, we'll do round 2, round 3, anything you want, mate. So, enjoyable chat, but seriously, I'm getting a bit lightheaded because I didn't eat much supper last night, and I got to eat something right now.
You got it. Go do it, Andy. Thank you so much for coming on the show, mate.
All right, cheers, Nate. Bye now.
Bye-bye. All right. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Andy, for spending the time with us, sharing those amazing stories. Lots more to cover, so I do look forward to setting up a part 2 another time in the future to cover some of those other wonderful releases. Again, everyone, please head over to the Ape House, ape.uk.net. Grab some of those XTC vinyl reissues. They are of limited quantity, so get them while you can. That's ape.uk.net. And everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Vinyl Guide. Please share this episode on your social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever you got. Please help us distribute these episodes and make others aware of the Vinyl Guide podcast. In fact, a huge favor would be for everyone to go up and leave us a positive review on Apple iTunes or Spotify or Google or wherever you get this podcast. Head up there, sign in, give us a 5 out of 5, a 10 out of 10, say something nice, make us blush. That would be hugely appreciated.
And we'll be back shortly with a brand new episode. So until we talk next time, keep spinning. Cheers.
That's it for this episode of The Vinyl Guide. Send your thoughts to Nate at thevinylguide.com or follow or tag us on Instagram at Vinyl Guide. Until next time, keep spinning.